Please make yourself at home. Make sure you're signed in and masked and come join us. Tonight is the last, definitely not least, but the last of our 2021-2022 Global Studies Speaker Series. I'm going to let our two speakers introduce themselves tonight, but please be involved. Both speakers have asked and indicated that they definitely want questions, they want engagement. No question is off limits, and if it's unethical, they'll tell you. So, and if any of my students are here, you know how much happier I am when you talk. So, I see you up there. So, thank you again, and we're going to turn this over. I'm going to start with Liz.
Good evening, everyone. I am Liz Coy. I am the Executive Director of the Walker Center for Applied Ethics here at Marian University. I've been here for a couple of years. And have done a lot of business overseas, which is why I get to ask the probing questions of our guest this evening. So we'll see what comes up. But you didn't come here to see me, you came here to see Fernanda. So.
Hey, thank you so much, Liz. My name is Fernanda Beraldi. I'm a Senior Director for Compliance and Ethics at Cummins, where I've been almost 7 years. I was born and raised in Brazil. If you follow the news, Brazil is always in the news for the wrong reasons. And it's a pleasure to be here with you, just to talk a little bit about what this profession looks like and why it's so interesting, and what do I do and how does my day look like. It's just very nice to be here with all of you. Thank you for coming.
Thank you. So I want to encourage you. I'm going to ask questions just to sort of pull the story, if you will, from Fernanda. But if something comes up, just raise your hand, and we definitely want to create a conversation if you want to create a conversation. So, Fernanda, thank you for being here. So, let's set the stage. Give us sort of your journey. How you got here, how you got to the United States, how you sort of wove through your career, because you've had a really interesting journey.
Yeah, thank you. Mm-hmm. So, as I mentioned, I was born and raised in Brazil, and I am a licensed lawyer in Brazil. So, my parents are lawyers. I decided I wanted to be a lawyer, but I always loved international business. I decided that I wanted to, explore and be working for a company that is global. So as soon as I graduated law school, I went to work for a firm for a couple of years, 4 to 5 years, and then I went to work in-house, which means you're working for a company, only one client, inside a company in Brazil called Embraer, which is a plane manufacturer, the third largest in the whole world. Embraer has business in, almost 200 countries. My work with them was to analyze contracts and close on deals related to service, maintenance, leasing, aircraft financing, and aircraft repos, which is like the show you see in TV, but in my case, it was large planes, like commercial planes, 100 plus people. At that point in time, I've traveled a lot around the world. I've been to 54 countries for business. Million miler, always on the road. Very interesting stories and to tell. We'll talk about them a little bit. But in 2009, the company that I used to work for, Embraer, got a subpoena from the Department of Justice. And the subpoena was about a violation of bribery, the violation of the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, which is the U.S. law against bribery around the world. At that point in time, I didn't know anything about anti-corruption. I didn't know anything about that law. That made me, in the eyes of my company, the specialist to work on this case. So the company gave me the ability to learn a lot from this case, and I decided that after 4+ years working on this case, along with my other responsibilities, that I was ready to do this in another part of the world. The Embraer case was settled in 2016 for a whopping fine of $260 million. And it was the first case in the Southern Hemisphere ever to be investigated. So a lot of learning. I was not even 30 years old when I deposed the CEO of my company. And you got to learn a lot from that. And a promise that I made to myself is that I was going to work for a company where the CEO sat behind doors is the same thing they say in front of the camera, right? With that, I decided to come to the U.S. and to be a lawyer in the United States. You either go through a JD program, full JD program, or you can do a Master of Law degree, which is an LLM degree. I applied for all of those possibilities here in the Midwest. I wanted to come to the Midwest. I wanted to be immersed in this cultural experience that is living in the Midwest. One of the, that was not a joke. One of the reasons why I wanted to come to the Midwest is because I wanted to use the skills to be in a different place. There are a lot of people like me in Florida, in California, in New York, but not a lot of people like me here. And I said, you know, I think my skills will go further in a place where they'll be just different. So one of the schools that accepted my application was IU McKinney, which is, as you know, Indiana University Robert H. McKinney School of Law, which is downtown. And I was luckily accepted with a 95% scholarship, which prompted me to quit my job without knowing anybody in Indiana and move to Indiana in 2014, in August of 2014. So if you do the math, I haven't been here 7+ years, almost 8 years. I've had, made a lot of friends here in Indiana. I love living in Indiana. I consider myself a Hoosierian, so a Hoosier Brazilian. I've been with the school, and this is why I love seeing so many students here. This kind of opportunity, this kind of talk, I went to many of those during my law school, doing the LLM program. It was always so fascinating to learn more about other people and their journeys and their careers. And you never know who you're going to meet, what kind of networking you're going to have, the paths that you may find out that you don't know. So I'm very excited to have you all here today to listen a little bit more about it. During this school, I'm very extroverted. You find out more about me during this, but I'm super extroverted. I love meeting people. So I was always looking for opportunities where I could meet more people. I applied during this LLM program to an internship with the Attorney General's office, which I got, and then in the following year, which was the spring semester of 2015, 2 externships at the same time, one with the Indiana Supreme Court Justice David, and the other one was ELA Lilly. I was the first foreign student at the LLM degree to get those scholarships, those externships. I graduated in 2015 in May and immediately had 2 offers to join Lilly or Cummins, and I decided to join Cummins as a lawyer and their compliance director for Latin America. I wanted to, again, my sense of purpose is helping the world to do better things and not having corruption so permeated in so many places of the world. If you know anything about Cummins, it's 62,000 employees, 24 billion in revenue, 200 countries, 7,000 dealers, 700 distributors, 77 JVs, and all of these lining up everything that they do from a compliance perspective, not bribing, not using, not engaging in conflicts of interest, not engaging in money laundering, making sure we are only exporting your goods to places where we can export. All of those are under my purview. I have a team of 7 people, and I am so privileged to lead them. We are a very small team for the size of the company, but very mighty. So and I've been with Cummins since, so almost 8 years now, 7. Yeah.
Thank you. So one thing that Fernanda didn't tell us is that Cummins, for 13 years, is that right? Or are we on 14 years, has been an Ethisphere, most ethical company. So if you know the firm Ethisphere, they rank companies top 100, I believe, and there are 3, I believe, in Indiana. And Cummins has been on the list for 13 years now. So Fernanda has her hand in that as well.
It's a long questionnaire of more than 1,000 questions that I have to respond to.
Okay, so does anybody want to ask Fernanda what the most surprising thing was when she arrived in Indiana before I move on? Because I do.
The most surprising
What
thing.
surprised you most about Indiana?
How everything that in all places that you are, in all engagement, in all conversations, there's always sports analogies. Everything is about sports. I'm like, okay, I consider myself pretty fluent, but there's so many, sports analogies. And yes, if anybody figured out how to
Things that don't translate.
Exactly, yes. Yes. They don't translate well. I come from a country where soccer, as you know, is the biggest sport. So when my boss tells me I'm going to knock it out of the park, in my mind it means I'm going to do a horrible job because I'm doing it with a soccer analogy, and it means, you guys know what it means, so, yes.
So language barriers.
Language
All
barriers.
forms.
Yes, and also so much interest about weather. Like, it's going to rain, it's going to snow. Like, I'm from Brazil. It's going to rain or sun and hot and humid the whole time. But here, it's part of the, yeah, exactly. We talk a lot about the weather.
So you ended up in this very important role in ethics, which started with anti-bribery.
Yeah.
So talk a little bit about sort of, is this, you know, did you wake up wanting to be an ethicist? Did you wake up wanting to be a compliance officer? At what point did that light bulb go on and it become a passion for you? Or did it?
No, we did. But first I had a job offer. We got to take that when they show up. But no, it was more about, and we'll talk a little bit more about this, but this profession doesn't really exist. You don't go to school to be an ethics professional. You don't go to school to be a compliance officer. There's no like undergraduate, graduate degrees. The majority of the folks that land in this profession are like me. We were business lawyers or labor and employment lawyers, and a case came through their desk and they decided to learn more about it, and that was my case. So I never woke up saying I'm going to be a compliance officer. By the way, this profession didn't exist, and I went to law school in 2003 back in Brazil. So it was more about understanding the possibilities and opportunities and molding my career to deliver something that's highly coveted now, which is this, working compliance and ethics. Yeah.
Can you just sort of orient us all from your perspective? Do you have to be a lawyer for compliance versus ethics? How are they different? How are they different at Cummins?
Yeah, thank you. You do not have to be a lawyer to be an ethics and compliance professional. That being said, it helps immensely. Like, it just helps because when we think about ethics, what are we trying to do? We're trying to do the things the right way, okay? You may try to do things the right way in the US and in Mexico and in Brazil and in India. The right way in all those countries is different, right? So how do you make sure you're all in a company like Cummins, we're all aligned to do the right thing when you have so many countries with different standards? You write a policy, and the people who write the policy are the people on my team. So giving an example around bribery, there is an exception in the United States where you can pay facilitation payments, which is called like a grease payment, kind of something to speed up a process. That is an exception of the law in the United States. It is considered something that's not a bribe, okay? That exception does not exist in India. That exception does not exist in the UK or in Brazil. So because we do business so globally, how do we align all those expectations? This is what ethics does. It's above the law, above and beyond the law to line everybody up in the same standard, right? Compliance is what we do when people don't follow the policy, right? So when they don't follow the policy, an investigation takes place, and then there's discipline that takes place. So ethics and compliance is what my team does. And our commitment as a function, as a department of Cummins, is to the truth, right? We want to find out what actually happened, and we want to prevent it from happening again. Because we are very noble people and we care about compliance, sure, but also because if it happens, the company may pay fines. I just mentioned the super hefty fine of $260 million that my prior employer paid. The record fine ever paid was by another Brazilian company. I don't know if I should celebrate that or regret that. It's around a $3 billion fine, okay, from a company called Odebrecht in an operation called car wash operation. If you're interested in learning more about this operation and what happened, there is a Netflix series called The Mechanism, and it talks about what happened in that case. Yeah.
So you go ahead.
Can I ask, you step back for a second and talk a little bit, you address what ethics means, and ethics is above the law.
Mm-hmm.
But what does that mean if in those different spaces you just talked about? What does it being above the law mean, and how you decide what is the truth even in that situation?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. Thank you, Adriana. So I'm going to give you an example around bribery, right? So as I mentioned, there's this exception of facilitation payments in the U.S. So if a U.S. based company is doing business in India, and there's a way you can speed up any kind of governmental license, let's say, you know, giving them an extra, I don't know, urgency fee, that's called restatement, okay? Discretionary but published somewhere and making sure that, you know, it's not paid under the table or anything. That exception only exists in U.S. law. If a UK company decides to do business in India and does the same, that's a bribe. So when you are trying to, what am I trying to do? I'm trying to inform my employees, inform the company employees, what they should be doing as we are doing business around the world, right? I'm not asking them to read US law or UK law, I'm asking them to read company policy. Company policy says don't bribe. If you feel you need to pay a facilitation payment, raise your hand. Because we'll investigate and understand whether it's possible and legal. And if it's possible and legal, we may think about paying it, right? So it's creating to our employees a route to do the right thing, not only telling them what's not to do, but how do you do it right. The law really doesn't tell you that. The law just says, don't bribe, facilitation payments are okay. But we're actually teaching the employees how to get to the solution or get to what we need them to do above the law. So they're not crossing the line and putting the company in trouble. Does that help?
So let's sort of go there with all the different countries. And I've been in many of them, and so they're not all the same, even though it sounds like India might have stricter laws than we do. So let's talk about this thing called cultural fluency, which may supersede some of the specific compliance issues. How do you learn it? How do you understand it? How do you prepare yourself to go to a country that's different than sort of the U.S. or in your case, South America?
Yeah, it's really important that compliance professionals have a global view. And it's also very hard to imprint this global view if you don't experience it. But my recommendation is that you always, if you can, travel. It's important to do so with eyes wide open so you learn more about the culture. But also, a lot of things that companies do here from the United States are very U.S.-centric. I'm going to give an example. When I joined Cummins, I was tasked with review of all the trainings that we give to the employees. All training, like instructor-led training, meaning slides, boring slides, death by PowerPoint, but also online training, the things that we push to people so they can push a button and like a YouTube video or something like that. Okay, so I'm trying to train people in Mexico how not to bribe a government official, okay? All the examples that we had in the training were about, a lot of the examples were very US-centric. Like, if you're inviting a person to go to a government official to go to a golf course, and I'm like, who plays golf in Mexico? I mean, right? So when you're trying to teach, I mean, of course there are people who play golf in Mexico, but it's not how you usually bribe people in Mexico. It's not taking them to the golf course, right? So if you're trying to expand the ripples of the message you're trying to give, how do they understand if they cannot relate to the training you're giving them, right? So it's not only a translation from English to Spanish, it's a cultural translation. What does bribe look like in Mexico? It's probably going to be a big TV showing up in somebody's house, right? It's not going to be taking the person to the golf course or, it's just not going to be that. So that raised the fundamental issue is, what does a bribe look like in Japan? What does a bribe would look like in Korea or in Australia or in India, right? If you go to countries that are third world countries like Brazil and India, the mailman tries to bribe you, okay? Tries to get a bribe. He shows up with a tax notice. He knows he has to deliver that to you. He says, and he knows it's important because it says tax notice. He says, unless you give me $10, I'm not delivering this to you. Like, so it's at that level, right? So how, and then you're giving a training talking about golf course? Like, a person in India is not going to understand. When they don't understand, they won't relate. And the red flag that I want them to raise, so they don't pay a bribe, and I don't have to pay a fine afterwards, it goes unnoticed, right? So it's not only about language, it's about understanding how this shows up in other countries.
So I'm going to go there unless someone talk to me about how your effectiveness as a woman in some of these countries.
Tough question. In a lot of countries, the women are just not seen and perceived and respected as they are respected here in the United States. I've experienced this a lot in my prior employer and my current employer. Not the employees that Cummins were mean to me, no. But just getting there to some places sometimes can be really difficult. I'm going to give you an example. I needed to travel to Saudi Arabia for Cummins, and I was traveling with my manager. My husband needed to give me a waiver because I was traveling with a man that wasn't my husband. So I'm like, what? Right? Getting out of the airport in Daman, which is in Saudi Arabia, I had to immediately wear an abaya getting out of the plane. Because if I didn't wear one, I would be dressed in Western clothes, which for the folks in the airport are an invitation to try to feel my Brazilian accent. So it's just really challenging, and you've got to be prepared in advance so you can be efficient without turning off the people who are there to listen to the message you have to give. And that is really, really challenging, especially if you travel so much without really knowing. A way to get prepared for this, and my prior employer gave us cultural fluency classes. So every time I would go to Japan or Korea, before going there for a deal, I would be trained on what to do, and most importantly, what not to do. Right? So if you go to Japan, and you may have heard this before, and you introduce yourself without really, bowing down and showing your business card with both hands and, some deference, you can just lose the deal. You can put the deal at risk. So those are small things that, again, you don't want to turn people off by not doing them, but if you don't know what you have to do, you may be jeopardizing a very important, very, very important deal for your company or a message you have to deliver. I'm going to give another example on Saudi Arabia. I'm not picking on Saudi Arabia, I promise. Went to Saudi Arabia for my prior employer and it's a very funny story, but a negotiation with Saudi Airlines. It's not an Embraer airliner. And I was the only woman, and my team was all men, so 2 people from France, and everybody else on the other side were men. For starters, they wouldn't shake my hand, right? They wouldn't talk to me directly, so they would tell, like I'm talking to Adriana, tell Liz that we don't want this clause in the contract because blah, blah. So they wouldn't talk to me directly. It was like I wasn't there, right? It's completely transparent. And very tense negotiations just by having a woman in the meeting room. At a certain point in time, there was a break for prayer. At a certain point in time, they had to stop to do this specific prayer. And everybody on the other side, on my side, went to the bathroom, like a bio break before prayer. The people on my side were Catholics, and the other folks were the ones that needed a break, but they all went to the bathroom together. I would say 10 minutes later, my 2 team members come running and say, we gotta leave, you need to leave, pack your stuff, we're gonna leave. I'm like, what happened? They were very frantic. So as they were in the bathroom, and the folks on the other side were, getting ready for prayer, they had to remove their hats and, to wash their hands and wash their heads before the prayer. My team members were very, they were still talking in the bathroom with the other folks. They didn't realize what was going on. And one of my team members wiped his hand in the guy's hat, which he thought was a towel. So, yes. Cultural fluency, yes. I took the class, right? So, the folks on the other side were really mad, right? So when they finished the prayer, they came back and really want us to leave. Like, a lot of yelling and screaming and, how is this going to go? And I have a, $300 million deal on the table. I really need to close it, right? Okay, so this, accusations flying, you got to leave, and this is disrespectful, you disrespect disrespected my religion, get out of here now, and I'm like thinking about the deal, trying to think quickly, what am I going to do? I decided to stop everybody, and without really looking at him like I'm looking at Liz, but saying, you know, you have a plane you need to fly, and we have the service you need. So do you have an adjacent room? And he says, yes. One of them said yes. I'm like, why don't you allow us to use this next room for the following days so you guys don't have to look at each other, and I'll be the messenger. You tell me what you want to do with this clause, and I'll check with them, and I'll just be the messenger back and forth, because you won't be able to fly the plane. This is completely breaking protocol, right? You're not supposed to talk to me, you're not supposed to even look at me, and I am here just like breaking all the rules of cultural fluency in Saudi Arabia. We close the deal 3 days later. So you need to be able to know the limits, to be able to navigate those situations that can be really, really challenging, and think quickly. And had I not taken the class, I would not know how to do it. So
speaking on navigating ethics as a woman in complicated spaces, so a lot of the language we're using right now, we're talking about ethics and law, and it's about doing the right thing, but it is also tied to doing the legal thing.
yes.
How do you navigate, and you can answer this personally or professionally if you choose, navigate ethics in spaces like whether the company is doing business in China while the government is being boycotted for genocide, or doing business with a company that is clearly not partial to, based on race, sex, orientation, religion, whatnot. How do you navigate that space?
Yeah, I am very lucky to work for a company that cares about those things. So I'm going to give an example. In the 80s, Cummins exited South Africa because of apartheid. They didn't want to do business in a country that discriminated people. So when you work for a company like that, it's easy to align your values with the company values. So even in the Middle East, where women are considered less than men, Cummins treats everybody the same. They all have cubicles. They all meet together. It's the company policy, right? We don't want to put anybody at risk by doing this, and we do have special safety, security in places like that, but we don't really tweak things to be able to conform with local culture if it's not the law. Like, comply with the law, yes. Comply with local culture to the detriment of our policy, no.
So you say the key for having being able to engage in ethical business practices is not only knowing your own ethics, but it's ensuring you're choosing to work in institutions and spaces and companies that are ethical.
Correct.
It should be like a huge drum roll for that. It's huge.
Yeah, it is huge.
And bringing your company.
I would agree. And the most important thing is, if you really want to be an ethics professional, you need to realize the weight of this title, right? It's not just being a compliance and ethics officer, compliance and ethics professional. Anything that happens wrong in your company, your name is intrinsically associated with it. So think really hard. If you want to go into this profession, who are you going to work for? Who is going to be the person benefiting from your talent? Because it can be really challenging depending on the company you're working for. Specifically about China, we know nowadays there's a whole Xinjiang region, right, that has been in the news for the Uyghur enslavement, right, training camps. So for us, what really is important is making sure that the business that we do in that region never touches anything that is aligned with what's happening there. So anything in the cotton industry, tomato plantations, none of those things are things that are supported. Yeah. Any other questions? You guys are so quiet. Come on.
Okay, so let's talk about, I picked what I thought was one of the more obvious barriers to doing business, which is gender, because that's real. But let's talk about language. I mean, you speak many languages, but you don't speak every language in every country you go to. Talk about sort of that as a, as a barrier, as trying to be effective, understanding the cultural.
Language abilities are also very important. I'm fortunate to be able to learn many languages, but if you don't know a language, but you need to go to a country where there's a language you don't speak. My suggestion is that you get somebody from your company to be with you the whole time, translating everything. Or you get a professional translator to be with you, just because it is impossible to pick the nuances of a language. And again, just the reaction mode needs to be so quick, that you don't want to jeopardize your safety, your security, or something else because you don't understand, or you need somebody to come and talk to you about it. You just need to have a translator with you the whole time. And anything you can do to learn a little bit more about the culture of the country before you go, reading a book, watching a movie, you should take the time to do that.
You all speak 5 languages? 5, right? How many do you speak? 5.
Yeah.
So,
Yes,
you have an advantage over us.
Yeah. Portuguese, English, Spanish, French, and conversational German.
So let's shift a little to, you're an undergrad. Let's say you got to go back. You knew you were going to end up in ethics back when you were an
I get to go back.
You get to go back. What would you have done in your undergrad career? Or would you have done anything differently, or what would you have added? Or
Yeah, knowing this is such a big trend, I would have taken more classes that are global, or if any that are globally oriented, or if there's any compliance class, I would have taken it. But that was such a new thing back then, although specifically the anti-bribery law in the United States exists since 1977. It only started to be enforced around 2008, and at that point in time was already 5 years out of law school. So I would have gone back and taken those classes. It gives you a people skill, and it gives you again, this ability to understand people at a different level, human behavior, what motivates people to do the right thing and the wrong thing, that you can't just get by being a lawyer. So I would have taken that.
what? I want to circle back, because I touched on it, but I think it's really important. If you were looking, you're coming out of school and you're looking for that company whose ethics might align.
Mm-hmm.
Questions would you ask?
Oh, that's a great question. One of the things is whether you think, you went to an interview, you said how wonderful you are, and then it's time for you to ask questions. So my first question is everybody in this company treated the same? So the same violation is committed by a person in the lower level of the company, entry level, and all the way to, let's say, C-suite or upper levels of the company. Would those two people be treated the same? Because if they're not, you're working for a company that's highly hierarchical, and you're working with application of the rule and defining people's livelihoods in a very gray zone, and that is not acceptable. For me as a lawyer, it hurts one of my values. So this is called, in ethics speak, this is called organizational justice. So somebody that's entry level commits, I don't know, bribery. I keep talking about bribery, it's just because it's easy for me, but engages in a conduct that's aligned with bribery and against the policy, and the CEO of the company does the same. Both of them should be fired. I don't care if one is in India, in Japan, Australia, Brazil. I don't care. Both of those people should be terminated. And if a company doesn't do that, I have an issue with it. Another, and I would not work for them. A second question I would ask is, how many people do you have around the world that would say, I don't know, 5,000, 16,000, 10,000? When people call the hotline for help or to inform there's an allegation or violation, are they all calling from one place, or are they calling equally depending on how many people you have, right? So I'm going to give an example. At Cummins, 60% of the people are outside the U.S. and 40% are inside the U.S. We have around 12,000 employees in China. Do you know how many cases we used to have out of China 3 years ago? Less than 100. Yeah, so cases, I mean potential allegations for violation. And they range from conflict of interest, fraud, less than 100 cases when you have 12,000 employees. What does that mean? It means people are not calling the hotline. And why? because something's preventing them from calling the hotline. Is that you not doing a good job, or is it you're afraid of talking? Right? So you want to understand that that spread is respective to the number of employees you have in each country. Right? If not, something's skewed, and you need to find out why.
So there's an interesting question. So what does Cummins do when it finds out that its hotline is not to be used
Yeah, so
in a country or an office?
yeah, that's a great question. What we try to understand is the root cause, why people do not call the hotline. There are a few things. Fear of retaliation, so they feel that if I call the hotline, something's going to happen to me, people are going to fire me. I'm going to be a whistleblower, and people will just, target me for firing. People just may not know how to call the hotline. Or sometimes you call the hotline from China, but the hotline talks to you in English. Like, you want to make sure, whatever they're calling from, that they're able to convey what's happening in the language of the company, the language of the person who's calling, right? How intimidating it is for you to, from Mexico, call a hotline that's going to speak to you in English when you have something that can be very serious and you just don't know what to do. I say people call the hotline in the last available, it's their last available resource. They've been like wrestling with it, they don't know what to do, they say, I'm going to call the hotline and be anonymous. And then they get a recording in English, they're going to hang up. Right? So understanding why those issues, what is the exact root cause? So I mentioned fear, retaliation, language, don't know how to reach the hotline, or you say you have to do it from a computer, right? Some places in the world, people don't have computers. They don't have smartphones. They don't have my technician on the ground in Zambia. They don't have a computer, okay? So if I say use the computer to talk to us, you may not be able to ever file a hotline case, right? So creating those, let's say, multiple paths to get to the hotline, language availability, and just looking at those numbers, like China with 12,000 people and 100 cases, there's something happening there. Increased communication about it, making sure, increased training about it, make sure people understand the process is fair, short, caring, and consistent outcome, right? That gets people to, we actually increased the number, we're up now to 500 cases per year.
By the way, I'm modeling behavior. You have a thought in your head, you're curious, your arm, right or left, I don't give you a list, any body part goes up, they call, you ask a question, just because you're curious how this works. So let's say I'm at a company, or talking to our students who are thinking about stuff. A lot of our students are going to take the job they're offered when they get the first job, or you're excited, you're going to pay me, yay. What do you recommend that they do when they're thinking about creating a more ethical world, a more ethical workplace, from whatever role they have? But 99% of the people in this room are probably not going to be compliance officers, probably only have one or two potential lawyers. So how do they engage in this kind of ethical work or transformational work through an ethical lens from any level?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say when we say transform the world or create a more ethical world, it sounds so like grandiose, right? You need to, it's like start with small steps. In I think Qatar, somebody wasn't a person was not a compliance officer. She called the hotline and said, your policy says everybody should be treated the same. I am a woman, I have to be in this room closed doors, and all of the guys are out there. Why are we not treated the same? She changed her environment, and she changed all the facility because of what she said. She changed all the facilities in Qatar, and now it's more integrated than it used to be, right? So look for small opportunities and speak up, right? Nobody's going to figure out what's in your head if you don't talk, right? You don't have to, creating a more equitable and just world does not, it does not have to be grandiose fireworks all the time. It can be small attitude, small increments, bite-sized approach that eventually creates this widespread change. I have a hand up there.
I have two separate questions. So my first would be, what does basically your typical work week look like? And then secondly, when you're trying to institute kind of like a company-wide policy, especially for a global company, do you find that working against any sort of community building in terms of trying to lay down kind of a universal policy where you may not be directly connected to the people? Is there any sort of room for more localized application of really consequences for infractions?
Thank you. I'll take the first question first, which is how does my workday look like? In one word, it is insane. But because of the wide range of the company that I work for and the number of people under the purview of my team, I work with the time zone, okay? So I start my week on Sunday night talking to Australia and China because for them it's Monday morning. Okay? And I want to figure out what's going on there so they can start their week going. And I work every day with the sun. So Australia, China, India, Middle East, Africa, Europe, Brazil, Colombia, United States, California. That's how my day works. So at the end of my day, I'm talking to folks that are in the, I would say, Pacific time zone, and I start my day as early as I can talking to folks that are on the east part of the world. It takes an adjustment. I think I can, Australia now is 16 hours ahead of me, so if 5 p.m. for me is already like, you do the math, 9 a.m. for them on the following day. So it takes some adjustment. My day can be from creating training that's going to be rolled out for the entire company, working in an investigation case, talking to a team member that has an issue, talking to my manager about a report that he wants, talking to one of our audit committee members about a case that he heard about. It's all of that range, all at the same time, working on an M&A, merger and acquisition, integration, like we just bought a company, we need to integrate compliance and ethics in that company into that company. So it's all them, all at the same time, across the world. That's question number one. And question number two is how do we make sure policies they respect the local flavor at the same time are consistent? Is that correct? That was your question.
I think it would be more, is there any room for, I suppose the word would be grace within kind of a more localized context, or is it kind of people at the top make the decision and that happens the exact same everywhere across the world?
No. I mean, if it happened like that at the same time, it wouldn't be efficient, right? It wouldn't be effective. Again, people wouldn't be able to relate. I'm going to give you an example. The money laundering policy that we have at Cummins say, don't launder money using company resources. Pretty basic, right? But in each country, for instance, Colombia says, to be able to have an efficient compliance against anti-money laundering, you have to have this policy that says this, but you also have to have 1, 2, 3, 4. So my policy cannot be, my corporate global policy cannot be as detailed that it turns off the local need to have some adjustments. So, but I also don't want a policy per country because that is really hard to track, right? So there's got to be this fluid, let's say flexibility where we allow a local compliance with a local requirement under the umbrella of the corporate policy? That's a great question.
How do you...
I think there was a hand.
You know?
Go ahead.
What are some examples that you work with, I'll just say unjust laws, and you might say unethical?
Yeah. Apartheid was one of them. And South Africa, I didn't have to personally work with it, but the company decided not to engage. It's a decision that is not made alone. It's a decision that's made not on my own. It's a decision that's socialized, but I don't recall having to argue, right? I don't want us to do this in this place. It's always an alignment about none of us in this company want to do this thing in this place. We don't want to help the police in a certain country because they are doing camps, right? Or Belarus, like we don't want to help. We don't want to be part of any, crushing down on folks that are dissidents of Lukashenko, right? What is really helpful is that usually when we are in the brink of having to say no to certain countries, there's a sanction that comes from the U.S. government that says to companies, don't sell to the Crimea region in the Ukraine, or don't sell to Iran, don't sell to Syria, don't sell to Cuba. So the U.S. government, for the good and the bad, they're very close to this decision making, and having a sanction helps companies like ours not to have to make those decisions in a way that would target and isolate our own company. Does that help?
Fernanda, what is your role with leadership of the company to be making those kind of decisions about big company decisions?
Yeah.
What role do you have?
Yeah, so those are what we call geopolitical decisions, right? Which is bringing people together, raising the issue and bringing people together so collectively there's a decision made. So people in this room would be ethics and compliance, legal, government relations, human rights, labor relations, a person in like the country leader, did I mention HR of that country, security, because sometimes we take decisions that we don't want to take a decision that puts people at risk, right? So it's bringing all those voices to this room, and sometimes it takes a while until all the calendars align and the stars align. We can have a discussion. We try to have this as quickly as possible. So we are in one meeting making this decision. My role is to bring the issue, bring possible solutions, and think about pros and cons, and each function, each department will bring their own pros and cons, and we'll take a socialized decision.
How did the pandemic affected your job? And what did you do?
Oh my God, yeah, that's a great question. Thank you, Mama. So things that I used to do by going to places, let's say, there's an allegation of an investigation in Russia, okay? So what I would do, send a team member there. Sometimes myself would go there, lining up people, interviewing them, understand what happened, right? Create a report, all of this very quickly in person, right? Well, now pandemic meant that I couldn't go anywhere, and nobody could go anywhere, right? So how do you get those cues when you're talking to somebody to figure out whether they're lying? Through Zoom. Super challenging, right? How do you move things around? For instance, I would say if Liz was engaged in something that is suspicious, I would say, Liz, come to the branch, let's have a conversation. I would interview Liz, get her computer, and copy everything that's in her computer to figure out what emails she's sending, anything. If I do this, I cannot talk to the person on Zoom because they use the computer for Zoom. Right? So there was a moment in time that I had to have an interview through Zoom with a person that was being investigated, right? And then as soon as the interview finalized, I said, now open the door and deliver your computer to the courier that's right there. So you have to time, then again you consider time zones, tools, resources, people on the ground, all through during the pandemic. It's very challenging. And then Cummins has around 1,800 cases a year. So cases, a lot of them are HR cases, right? But the ones that cross my desk, around 20% of those. So you have to do that at the global scale with that level of detail. That's why I said insane. So you have many said how I did. Yes?
What do you think is the greatest ethical challenges that we're facing in 2022 or moving forward, both nationally and globally?
Well, that's
From
very,
whatever perspective you want.
it's a very tough question. I would say the U.S. has a primary role in trying to, like, as I mentioned, the bribery policy, the bribery law. In 1977, started to be, really enforced in 2008, and then all countries followed, right? I would like to see the U.S. kind of regaining the role of pushing everybody to be better, and I think we're still losing some traction in that. I would like to see that moving forward more quickly. I also would like to see countries that are third world countries like Brazil and India and Mexico not only having laws that are made to copy U.S. law, but they're also enforced at the same rate that U.S. law is. So I would say creating a world that's more consistent in application of law and punishing bad behavior. If possible, that's what we'd like to do. Companies like mine have a special role because of how many places they touch and how many people they have and how diverse we are. So I have a really important role in pushing this to make it happen. Any more questions? No?
I have,
You have one?
I
Okay.
want to make sure.
All right.
Okay, so you are a team of 7.
Yes,
You have how many employees?
62,000.
62,000. No way you have an ethical company. How do you do it?
Yeah, so it's a mix of employing people's tools, employing people for the things that are better done by people, and employing tools and software for things that are better done by software. The whole team at Cummins is 14, and my team 7. So do I need to have a person doing what we call due diligence to figure out whether a distributor is bad and we don't want to engage with them, or can I have a software to do that? When we have 7,000 dealers, we probably want a software, right? So creating this balance. The other thing too is multiplying people that are part of your team without having them on your budget. In my case, it's called ethics champions or ethical champions, right? So finding out people in each facility that we have around the world, in each business unit that we have around the world, and ask them whether they want to be an ethical champion. That means the person who's going to just do some traffic lighting, right? Oh, you want this policy? Find this policy this place. You want this policy? You find this in this place. Oh, you don't know how to manage this gift you just received? You call this. So it's the person to further your message without actually taking decisions, right? It helps to get the sense of the ground, like the boots on the ground sense, without multiplying people in your team, and they wouldn't be on your budget. So we have around, I don't know, maybe 100 of ethical champions, and it's people want to be them. People, they see it as an important role, and people apply to be an ethical champion. Again, it's not a job, it's something they do in addition to their job, but it's something they want to do. So they're connected to corporate, it's an opportunity for them to get visibility with leadership, and just to be, changing the world in that facility they work for.
One of the things I remember when I first met you, Fernanda, is you were presenting the results of, I think, an ethics survey.
Yeah,
You did an ethics culture survey across Cummins.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember this because, one, it's fairly unique to do it in any company, but a company of the magnitude, not only just sheer numbers, but the number of countries and the number. So talk a little bit about where that came from. Was the board engaged in it? Where did it start? Who embraced it? And did it work?
Yeah, it did. So an ethical culture survey is a survey that you would deploy. It's something like an engagement survey, but it's ethical geared. So you'll have, in our case, like 30 plus questions in 17 different languages, where people are just multiple choice, the majority of them, and they are just telling us more about how they experience ethics in their role. I say the major driver for an employee's experience of ethics is their own manager, right? You may have a CEO saying, oh, we're wonderful, we do all those things right, but if the person's manager in that facility in Azerbaijan is not treating them well, their experience of ethics is just really bad, right? So the survey goes to that level, right? So when we had 34,000 employees out of the 62,000 responding to the survey. So crunching all that data by gender, by tenure with the company, by age group, by region of the world, and then you cross that data. It gives you it's so rich, but it's rich, and I'm fascinated by data, but you got to do something about it, right? So employees in China said, I'm afraid of being retaliated against, but employees in Brazil say, I don't know how to call the hotline. Those are the two root causes for the same result. The plan, the action plan I'm going to implement in China, coming from the survey, is different than the one I will implement in Brazil. So the survey gives me that level of understanding of root cause analysis that prompts me to create action plans to be implemented by my team at that level that would try to solve the problem. But it's an ongoing thing, so I do it every 3 to 4 years. We do it again. We compare results. We included a sexual harassment question in this last one to figure out, it was Me Too time, so we wanted to figure out how were people experiencing that at Cummins. It was just really an eye-opener. The results were shared with our board. The results were shared with our board, and we got a ton of follow-up questions. It was really interesting.
I guess it wasn't subtle enough to go quick staring at me. We've got about 5 to 7 minutes left, and I wanted to make sure if you guys have a chance to ask any last minute questions. I mean, I want to hear about the plane, but all I know is that there's supposed to be a plane story that is promised. So I want to hear the plane story, but I want to see if anybody had any questions.
Go ahead.
What's been the hardest case you've ever worked with?
The what?
The most difficult case you've ever worked
Most
with?
difficult case?
Was it the plane? Because Adriana wants to hear about the plane.
Yeah, so I mean, from an ethics perspective, it wasn't the plane. I'll get to the plane story, but from an ethics perspective, I never lose sight of the fact that there's somebody else that's a person on the other side of everything that I'm doing, right?